Before I start, at the outset, I want to recognize, in our midst this evening, a few people, a few of our members and those who are coming for the first time. I think immediately I want to recognize the Symbiosis University in Pune. Professor Aniket, is he here? Who's brought the team? Oh, there he is. He's a former SPS member and he's now teaching in Symbiosis. So when he said that a group of students were visiting and could they join, we said most certainly. Because the whole attempt of the SPS and the Habitat, if you attend one of our events, it's a bit like a pug wash. You get co-opted for life and there's no divorce, So as long as you're in email contact, you'll keep getting our invites and, you would be encouraged to participate. So I want to welcome and greet the young students of the Symbiosis University, and I hope you have a productive visit in Delhi. I want to thank Mr. Kakkar, the director of the Habitat, for also enabling some of their interactions at the Habitat. And for today's lecture, as I said, we have some of our more valued members of the society. I'm glad Mrs. Sobi is able to join us. She's organized a number of events under the trust that she looks after on behalf of her late husband, Professor Sobi. Ambassador Sikri, one of our senior diplomats, who's also here this evening, and members of the diplomatic corps. I see many familiar faces, so I'm delighted that all of you are here. And for those who are coming for the first time, brief sort of introduction to this particular lecture series. We started this series a few years ago now, it's more than 2 years. And at that time, the sort of trigger pulse was that Delhi as a city needed to nurture a forum where we could have some kind of deliberation and have civil society and its members engaging in a discourse, some kind of a debate or exchanging ideas and thoughts on a range of subjects. And Habitat very kindly offered to support us in this endeavor. And now every 2 months we have this particular lecture series, and more recently, we have anchored it under the umbrella of the Changing Asia series. And today's lecture, I'm very glad to introduce and welcome in our midst Ambassador Ashok Kantha. Till recently, he was the Indian ambassador to China in Beijing. And currently, he is the director of the Institute for Chinese Studies. For those of you who are not familiar with the ICS, particularly our younger scholars here, I would urge you to visit the website of the ICS. It's a very dynamic site. It has a lot of publications, lots of activities that you might like to savor or benefit from. And when we were planning this series in our little internal meetings that we had, at that time China and the Belt Road Initiative was very much on the radar, and we thought that we would try and request one of our domain experts, as it were, to speak on the subject. And I'm delighted that we have Commodore Dham with us also. He was at that time, when the BRI started, Ashok, Ambassador Kantha was our ambassador in Beijing. 2014, sir, roughly, when it started. And that's when I think the BRI as an idea was mooted there. And over the last 3 years, it's taken its own, I would say, trajectory in terms of how it is being pitched. As far as Southern Asia is concerned, it's a very ambitious project. Again, most of you are aware that India has formally decided not to be part of the BRI, though there are many other countries who, despite their ambivalence, are still engaged with this particular idea. And there are two sort of additional kind of points that you might want to hoist. One is that the BRI as an initiative or as an idea has been associated with President Xi Jinping. And as again, most of you, I'm sure, as China watchers are aware, President Xi Jinping starts his second term formally on the 3rd or 5th of March, when the parliament sort of would elect him formally. And as of yesterday, today is a Monday, so as of yesterday, Chinese time, Sunday, it was announced that now they are lifting the 2-term ceiling for the Chinese president. So which means, unlike his predecessors, Mr. Jiang Zemin and Mr. Hu Jintao, President Xi is actually most likely to be president for life. So this is a very significant political development. And what it means, for the BRI and more, I'm sure that Ambassador Kantha would be able to shed some light. So sir, I have great pleasure in welcoming you in our midst. And we'll have the same format, which is that he'll speak for about 40 minutes, and after that we'll have a QA session. And again, I'm requesting all of you that to the extent possible, try not to shuffle or leave till he finishes the lecture. If there's somebody who must leave, then I'd like to see how you make an unobtrusive exit where you won't be noticed from here. I leave that to you. Ambassador Kantha, all yours, sir. Please.
Thank you, Uday, for that introduction. Commodore Uday Bhaskar, Director, Society of Policy Studies, my good friend, Director, India Habitat Center, Mr. Bhaskar, and all the friends present here, and especially young friends from Symbiosis who have traveled from Pune. Now, I deeply appreciate this invitation to deliver this lecture hosted by India Habitat Center in collaboration with the Society of Policy Studies under its Changing Asia series. I have been asked to speak on China's Belt and Road Initiative, nature, implications, and India's response. As you are aware, the Belt and Road Initiative, or BRI, or One Belt, One Road, or OBOR as it was called earlier, is a highly imaginative and strategic enterprise of unprecedented scale and ambition. And I'm using all these adjectives in a very deliberate fashion. It's part of China's larger agenda of pursuing its increasingly explicit great power ambitions. So I'll therefore make my presentation in three parts. I'll first try and explore China's leadership ambitions. Secondly, I will examine nature and implications of BRI. And finally, I'll discuss India's response to this mega enterprise of President Xi Jinping. Now, coming to the first part, China's leadership ambitions. What's the big picture? The rapid rise of China has resulted in unprecedented accumulation of power by the country. Not surprisingly, this has led to progressive evolution of China's regional and global aspirations. Given President Donald Trump's America First policy, and his ambivalence over the USA's global leadership role, China discerns a strategic opening today to further expand its regional and global profile. This could be the third wave of assertion by China of its leadership role. I'll suggest that the first wave or first phase of China's quest of leadership role was in the immediate aftermath of global economic crisis, when an assessment was made in China that the West was in decline. In fact, some people went to the extent of saying that West is in terminal decline, which was rather reviewed a little later. And that was seen as providing China with an opportunity to expand its role regionally and globally. The second phase was ushered in following Xi Jinping coming to power in late 2012, first as General Secretary to the CPC, and in March 2013 as the President of the People's Republic of China. And one could see that Deng Xiaoping's famous 24 character dictum, observe calmly, secure our position, cope with affairs calmly, hide our capabilities, and bide our time, be good at maintaining low profile, and never claim leadership. It's important to look at all 24 character formulation rather than piecemeal. This started receding in the rear view mirror. So China clearly started moving beyond that advice. Today, China is prepared to deploy its considerable political, economic, military, and diplomatic clout in pursuit of its strategic objectives. However, I would enter a caveat here that China is still reluctant to expand its international responsibility too rapidly, still moving in a sort of deliberate, calibrated fashion. When we talk of China's grand strategy, what needs to be understood is Xi Jinping's Chinese dream of great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation, which translates into China seeking to restore its perceived rightful leadership role. And it's important, the point that Uday made a short while ago, Xi Jinping's role as the preeminent or supreme leader, and now of course the possibility that he may hang around much longer than what was anticipated earlier. China is now shaping the environment and its periphery in the quest of an objective dating back to the 19th century. And here a key term is Fuqian, which means an economically prosperous and militarily strong China. In fact, since late 19th century, this has been a key Chinese objective. Today, China is much closer to realizing that objective, and in that pursuit, the Belt and Road Initiative is a major instrument. China is today a country in hurry, as it's keen to lock in its advantage during the current window, what it perceives as strategic opportunity. It's suggested at times that this window may not be available for long, given the slowing down of the Chinese economy, internal fault lines in the country, its aging population, and growing external pushback to its assertive behavior. But for the time being, China offers an expansive definition of core interests, including its territorial claims. At the 19th Party Congress, Xi Jinping, in his work report, averred, and I quote, "Under no circumstances will China sacrifice its national core interests." Now, this was in sharp contrast to his assurance at the Belt and Road Initiative Forum in May last year, when he said that all countries should respect each other's core interests and accommodate each other's major concerns. Just a few months later, he was to say that under no circumstances China will compromise on its core interests. There is a distinct pattern of unilateralism vis-a-vis contested territories, as we are witnessing in case of South China Sea or Doklam for that matter. It has been observed that China is taking ambitious steps to accrue national power by increasing its investments and assets that established American authority in the previous century. And here I am referring to foreign assistance, prioritization of overseas interests, moving towards a network of overseas bases, beginning with Djibouti, pursuit of maritime power, foreign influence, a larger role in global rule setting, and focus attention to new technologies and innovation, especially under Made in China 2025 mission. With rapid accumulations power, China is no longer keen on multipolarity, though it continues to pay lip service to it from time to time, including in Xi's work report to the 19th Party Congress in October last year. Instead, it talks of a new model of major power relations. Its emerging preference is for hierarchical order. First, seek equal status with the US as an established superpower, then preeminence in the Asia-Pacific, but eventually strive for global leadership. It is within this larger context that we must look at BRI, which is a Chinese project and not a multilateral initiative. I think this is one point which needs to be understood very clearly. An important point to note is that BRI is a signature initiative of President Xi Jinping, which has been backed up with huge resources. The idea of BRI didn't originate from Chinese official establishment. It came directly from the top, from the coterie around Xi Jinping, and it has been fleshed out also under direct guidance of Xi Jinping. The Shinhua announcement of yesterday that Commodore Uday Bhaskar referred to, that the Central Committee of the Communist Party of China has recommended the removal of the two-term limit for presidency and vice presidency in the state constitution, merely confirms the earlier assessment that Xi Jinping plans to stay on as China's supreme leader or Lingshuo, well beyond his second term, which will come to an end in roughly 5 years' time. Accordingly, we may expect BRI to remain a central feature of the Chinese strategy. So the importance of BRI is just going to increase, it's not going to diminish. BRI has several pragmatic considerations linked to China's connectivity agenda, the quest for new growth engines for its slowing economy, utilization of its surplus capacity, development of new markets as it moves up the value chain, more gainful employment, deployment of its foreign exchange reserves, internationalization renminbi, and the desire to develop and stabilize its western regions. BRI will also generate public goods for participating countries by filling up continental maritime connectivity gaps in Asia Pacific and across Eurasia, building infrastructure, augmenting production and supply chains. Though numbers are difficult to pinpoint with accuracy, but it has been suggested that total Chinese government commitment to BRI project could be in the vicinity of $1 trillion US. It's evident that BRI holds considerable attraction, and over 70 countries had caught on its bandwagon, an aspect which is at times overlooked or underestimated in India. At the same time, we must recognize that BRI is above all a geostrategic initiative by China aimed at shaping its periphery and carving out a continental maritime realm with China as anchor, central player and sutradhar, so to say. It helps China achieve its geopolitical objectives, binding other countries more closely to its own growth story. China is systematically putting in place a universal institution led by it, while at the same time expanding its role in the existing architecture of institutions like UN Security Council or WTO or World Bank for that matter. So these two processes are going on simultaneously. Indeed, BRI is much more than about developing connectivity and physical infrastructure, though that is projected as the core dimension of the initiative. The Vision Action Plan for OBOR, as it was called at that time, of March 2015 outlines objectives of OBOR as enhancing policy coordination across the Asian continent, trade liberalization, financial integration, and connectivity, including people-to-people links. China is also seeking to influence the setting of rules and standards in the extended periphery. In fact, BRI has become a sort of catch-all phrase where new elements keep getting added, the most recent being pursuit of a polar Silk Road. BRI is also based on an imagined narrative of China as the hub of ancient trading routes. China was an important stop in these trading routes, but it was never the hub of those trading routes. This creative or contrived history sought to give legitimacy to China's present ambitions of its centrality in the emerging regional and global order. For them, the narrative is very important, and this is something we need to understand. As Andrew Small brings out in a recent article in Foreign Affairs, no region seemed to be a more attractive target for China's BRI than South Asia. He puts it starkly, and I quote, "The region has become the main battleground for OBOR's future, with India as its chief opponent, Pakistan its chief enthusiast, and in between countries from Nepal to the Maldives facing economic choices that have become highly politicized," unquote. China has made very little effort to take on board India's interests, concerns, and aspirations in its strategic backyard. The China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, or CPAC, is the flagship project of both land and maritime dimension of BRI and also its most advanced component. Our reservations are not only linked to CPAC traversing through POK, but also to how it will bolster strategic and military capabilities of both China and Pakistan and affect India's security environment. There are legitimate concerns about Gwadar Port as a likely Chinese naval base, upgraded Karakoram Highway, and closer strategic linkages between China and Pakistan. Likewise, development of ports around us under the Maritime Silk Road or MSR with long-term Chinese presence and operational control has serious implications for India. The unstated objective of MSR is to consolidate China as a maritime power in the South China Sea and the Indian Ocean. Recent developments in the Maldives have reinforced concerns in India that China is impinging on its strategic space. The progress or prognosis of BRI is still far from certain or clear. There are growing concerns about its modalities, lack of transparency and China-centric orientation. A recent CSIS report brings out that most of the BRI projects are cornered by Chinese companies through opaque processes. Out of all contractors participating in Chinese-funded projects within the Reconnecting Asia database, as many as 89% are Chinese companies, 7.6% local companies, only 3.4% are foreign companies. The absence of due diligence and proper viability studies results in recipient countries taking on projects which are not sustainable and well beyond their repayment capabilities. Sri Lanka, where the government has been forced to hand over Hambantota port to Chinese entities on a 99-year lease under a debt equity swap, is a cautionary tale. There is indeed growing pushback or concerns about BRI even among major beneficiaries of this initiative. Indeed, even in Pakistan, there is a fairly lively debate going on today on pros and cons of CPEC. While these concerns are there, we must acknowledge that even a partially successful BRI will change India's strategic and operational environment in a major way. Indeed, it has already done so. Let me come to the third part of my presentation, that is India's response. We have grappled with the issue of our response to One Belt, One Road OBOR, as it was described initially, ever since the idea was first broached with us in 2014. Our response has been clear and categorical as far as the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, or CPEC, is concerned. India has opposed CPEC because of sovereignty-related concerns, but also because of other sensitivities linked to it, as I just described earlier. However, the Government of India's response to the broader BRI enterprise has been more nuanced and has evolved over a period of time. I was present when OBOR was raised by Foreign Minister Wang Yi with our External Affairs Minister in Beijing during a visit to China in February 2015. EM told Foreign Minister Wang Yi that OBOR is a Chinese initiative rather than a multilateral one, and no blanket endorsement should be expected from us, but we are willing to explore synergy-based cooperation. Such a pragmatic approach based on convergence of interests resulted in India joining the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, or AIIB. I recall my discussions with Chin Li-chun, who was Secretary General of the Interim Secretariat and later became President of the bank. Chin Li-chun assured us that AIIB will be developed as a multilateral financial institution rather than as a China-centric bank. Our concerns were taken on board in its statutes. India joined China and 55 other countries in June 2015 to launch AIIB in Beijing. I happened to sign the agreement on behalf of the Government of India. India is the second largest stakeholder in AIIB, next only to China. An Indian national dominated by the Government of India is Vice President and Chief Investment Officer. AIIB has taken off as a viable multilateral development bank. Coincidentally, the annual meeting of AIIB is taking place in New Delhi later this week. Unfortunately, the pragmatic model of India and China working together in AIIB, even though the bank was conceived by China initially as part of its OBOR vision, has not been replicated subsequently as positions of both sides have hardened. As BRI has gained momentum, China seems to have lost interest in pursuing multilateral solutions based on convergent interests, possibly because of the geopolitical underpinnings of BRI, which I described earlier. It insists on bringing all projects under the rubric of BRI and maintaining China's centrality. It has shown little interest in accommodating India's concerns, interests, and aspirations in the shared periphery. In parallel, India has also shed its studied ambivalence and adopted a more negative stance vis-a-vis BRI, as Uday pointed out earlier. We not only refused to participate in the BRI forum hosted by Xi Jinping in Beijing last May, but came out with a strong statement articulating our reservations regarding this mega initiative. While looking at BRI, India has to assess its nature and implications. As we noted earlier, BRI is more than about connectivity and economic cooperation. It is, above all, a major geostrategic initiative undertaken by China, which has significant and often negative implications for us. It involves certain hardwiring of connectivity across land and maritime space, which boosts China's centrality. In our neighborhood, it is being pursued in a manner which causes legitimate misgivings in India. Besides, given the geopolitical orientation of BRI, an important question for us is whether India can join it as a junior partner. The answer, to my mind, is obviously will be negative. India thus has its valid reservations. It's unrealistic for China to expect an endorsement of BRI from India. At the same time, the two sides can still explore synergies between their respective connectivity and developmental agendas and agree on specific projects. Such a practical stance, after all, resulted in India joining AIIB. Can this approach be replicated in other projects? I believe the answer can be an affirmative. However, this will require both sides showing flexibility, which has not been evidenced for some time now. There is need for closer strategic consultations to find common ground. This will involve China not insisting on putting such projects under the rubric of BRI, placing premium on substance rather than labeling as it did in case of AIIB. Devising such an approach is going to be tough, but it's not an impossible task. However, we must resist plurilateral initiatives with India as key partner getting boxed under the rubric of BRI. For instance, we must insist that BCIM Economic Corridor be pursued as a sub-regional initiative with ownership of all four countries involved, rather than as a subset of BRI as the Chinese tend to do. Indian industry can also explore business openings linked to BRI projects coming up in its vicinity. Most of the BRI projects are, of course, linked to sourcing and contracts from Chinese companies, as we discussed earlier. However, there are also untied projects. There is international competitive bidding, for instance, for AIIB projects. Indian companies have been active and successful participants in projects and business opportunities provided through the World Bank ADB in Asia, and there is no reason why they shouldn't be encouraged to likewise explore openings created through AIIB funding, for instance. Likewise, Indian business can utilize infrastructure being developed by China. Let me give an example. India, Iran, and Afghanistan are working together to build a maritime road rail link to Afghanistan and Central Asia through Iran using the port of Chabahar. The connectivity thus developed could then use Chinese-built routes to access Central Asia and Russian destinations as well as Europe. Even by exploring the possibilities of cooperation in a pragmatic manner, we have to respond to BRI as a geostrategic challenge. How do we do so? We must recognize that we do not have resources or requisite political and economic clout at present to put in place an overarching strategy that can counter the narrative and influence of BRI. Ideas like Project Mawsam or Spice Route are hardly comparable or valid as alternative narratives. Instead, we need to develop elements of our own connectivity agenda with our neighbors and in the extended neighborhood based on pragmatic considerations and leveraging our own strengths. This will include identifying and pursuing strategically key projects in our land and maritime periphery rather than spreading our resources too thin. This will involve implementation of Prime Minister's vision of Sagar as a means for furthering the growth and development of the Indian Ocean region as littorals while projecting India's centrality in this maritime domain. We can deploy a limited resource to build an Indian Ocean network of ports with connecting highways and rail routes such as the Sitwe Mizoram Multimodal Transport Corridor, Kaladan Multimodal Transport Corridor, and Trilateral Highway. This will also involve defining red lines in a neighborhood beyond which we must mobilize all possible resources and influence to prevent Chinese presence. A critical factor will be whether we can offer alternatives to what China has to offer to target countries. Given our limited resources, we cannot do so on our own. Therefore, we'll have to work with like-minded countries which have shared concerns about geopolitical implications of BRI. And here I would like to mention that even though a large number of countries participated in the BRI forum in May 2017, since then many of those countries have developed reservations about nature of this enterprise. And there is a certain commonality of interest between us and those countries. It's important, however, that these alternatives must avoid certain weaknesses of Chinese approach. They must be driven by the requirements of the CPN countries and follow the best practices in terms of transparency, local participation, economic viability, and environmental sustainability. We have the Asia-Africa Growth Corridor and now reports on the Quad countries working together. Unfortunately, with some exceptions, there has been little progress on the ground so far. We may also expect greater Chinese focus on setting standards and laying down the rules of the road under the rubric of BRI, say in areas of customs or trade facilitation, or to set standards for telecommunications under China-led framework. Here again, we'll have to work with like-minded countries to ensure that our interests are safeguarded. Even while recognizing our current limitations, we must keep open the option of carving out at a future date our own continental maritime geostrategic realm built around the subcontinental landmass and the eastern and western reaches of the Indian Ocean. But at this point in time, we'll have to pitch our ambition at a level commensurate with our limited resources. Let me make a final point here. The grand narrative of BRI is both a manifestation and an instrument of the rise of China as a great power and a major growth engine of global economy. There's also the parallel, though less spectacular, re-emergence of India as a major power and growth engine. During Prime Minister's visit to China in May 2015, the leaders of the two countries agreed that the simultaneous re-emergence of India and China as two major powers in the region and the world must unfold in a mutually supportive manner, and that mutual sensitivity for each other's concerns, interests, and aspirations will be the key to managing this process, the operationalization of this understanding, and ensuring that India-China relations remain on a constructive track despite various challenges, despite concerns on both sides about each other's strategic ambitions, is going to be one of the biggest challenges in our foreign policy in the foreseeable future. Thank you very much.
That was a very comprehensive and I think nuanced overview of BRI and its various aspects, the nature, the implications, and India's response. So as in the normal practice, Ambassador Kantha has very kindly agreed to take a few questions. So we normally take 3 questions at a time, and then allow the speaker to be able to respond. So I will request you to please recognize yourself so that we can have it recorded. And I'll try to the extent possible to recognize all of you. I'm seeing some hands, thank you. So you go first, sir, and then I'll come. The standard sort of thing slightly perhaps at the latter part of the debate. Just introduce yourself.
This is Uday sir. This time I'm a practicing lawyer in Delhi. I have a certain issue. My question is twofold. First, in response to BRI, Chabahar port has been opened, and both Pakistan as well as China are skeptical because that opens up Middle East, Central Asia, and Trans-Caucasus to to allow India in its geopolitical expansion in whatever may and whatever be the constraints with India, provided that. And the second is with respect to infrastructure. India's infrastructure, made in India thing, is a concrete thing. As response to China, where an Apple phone that comes into India or that is transported all the way to the world is not exactly made in China. It sources everything from either Taiwan or some other countries out there. So their economic boom might burst anytime. With respect to that. That's it.
So my name is Sumanjit Chaudhary. I'm from the corporate world. I have two questions for Ambassador Kantha. Firstly, to what extent do you think Pakistan's independence and sovereignty have been compromised today with this participation that they're having with China? And secondly, to what extent do you think this will affect Pakistan's relationship with the United States?
Thank you. This question, yes, sir.
I myself Ravindra Prasad. Sir, my question to you, sir, according to you, India cannot join BRI as a junior partner or China cannot accept as a senior partner to India. But why not Indian leadership doing something like so that we will become like China in economic or other perspective so that we can compete China?
The success of this enterprise really depends on how we pursue it. What kind of resources we are willing to expend on Chabahar project, what kind of cooperation mechanisms we work out with Iran and Afghanistan. I don't think reservations expressed by Pakistan or China, in fact, they have not been expressed so explicitly so far, will not be a major factor as far as prognosis for Chabahar, the port project is concerned. We shouldn't worry too much about that. As for Pakistan, to what extent its independence is compromised by its participation in CPAC. In fact, within Pakistan today, a lot of questions have been raised about the pros and cons of China-Pakistan economic corridor, the kind of dependency it's generating in Pakistan, vis-a-vis China. The fact that even in power project, which are relatively advanced stage of completion, you have a situation where Chinese companies they have a degree of assured return backed up by sovereign guarantee. In fact, there are special escrow account where certain percentage of anticipated payment receivables coming out of these projects have to be assured by Pakistani government. There are questions about tariff of power coming out of these projects. There are questions about kind of obligation or undertaking government of Pakistan has taken in terms of provision of security. By and large, the opaque nature of these projects, lack of transparency, where even Pakistani parliament is not in the loop, the fact that the military is the preferred partner for China in the execution of CPAC project, a whole lot of issues which are being debated within Pakistan. But as of now, elements in Pakistani polity that matter, military in particular, and political establishment also to a great extent, are supportive of CPAC. So CPAC projects are moving ahead, though ultimate outcomes are still less than assured. Now,
to what extent are they likely to be compromised?
no, clearly, it is leading to a situation where there is concern in Pakistan that they are not getting best of the deal. These are not, the element of grant is relatively small in these projects. Mostly these projects are financed through loans and terms are opaque. But going by what we have witnessed elsewhere, including in Sri Lanka, these are near commercial terms. And soon, outflow from Pakistan in terms of repayment of debt will be very sizable. Whether Pakistan will be able to manage that, there is a question about that. Now, coming to your point about how it will impact Pakistan's relations with USA, as you know, Pakistan's relations with USA are passing through a period of considerable stress because of a variety of reasons. Those reasons are only very partly linked to Sino-Pak strategic linkages getting reinforced. I don't think that's a major consideration for USA. There again, whether President Trump will walk the talk on Pakistan, it's an open question. USA's own reasons, its own dependency on Pakistan. Pakistan leverages its strategic, geography both vis-a-vis China and USA. So, to what extent Sino-Pak linkages will affect Pakistan's relations with USA, I don't think that's going to be a huge factor.
Good evening, sir. This is Bharat. I'm a research associate with the Energy and Resources Institute. I just have a couple of questions. You mentioned that India should be applying for AIIB funded projects, and wouldn't that be implicitly accepting China's leadership? In a sense, I want to understand the relative influence of China in the different multilateral banks, World Bank, ADB, AIIB, BRICS, and so on. And my second question is, sir, we know that most of the oil imports to China passes via the Straits of Malacca, and the CPEC provides an alternative route via the port of Gwadar for oil imports. So I was just wondering, given the high Karakoram passes through which it has to pass through before it reaches the population or the consumption centers, the cost of transporting oil from the Middle East to eastern China via Gwadar, as opposed to via the Straits of Malacca. Will China realize in the long term that it's probably not going to be as feasible, although vulnerability-wise it might reduce given the Straits of Malacca being a choke point?
Good evening, sir. My name is Vishwajit Singh Nagar from CPAC School of International Studies. My question to you, sir, is that China has constructed a port in Pakistan, a port in Sri Lanka, and a port in a military base in Djibouti. So it has covered India from all sides. So, although there are economic ties, huge level of economic ties between these two countries, India and China, if a war breaks out, what would be, how is India going to tackle that problem? As Commodore Uday Bhaskar, when he visited us, I'll quote him, he said, your diplomacy is as strong as your army. So, how strong is that army?
Yeah, glad you mentioned Pakistan's loss of sovereignty and not India's loss, because that is all theoretical anyway. It'll be okay. My question is really the development that is going to take place in that area where this BET and road initiative is taking place. Will that help? Will that development help to bring down terrorism in the area by Pakistan? Because that, after all, is the biggest problem that we face. And obviously, the US is, recently China itself has, I think, had a soft approach towards condemnation of Pakistan for terrorism. So you think overall, in the long run, the Belt and Road Initiative will create development within the entire region, and it will force India also, of course, to follow China's initiatives to develop the northeast and so on, where we have done nothing
so far? Thank you.
My name is Sosti from Symbiosis. In this region, we have this association that we call CPAC. And if we look at CPAC, we find that India and Pakistan are the major players in the CPAC. But their poor relations, they make CPAC weak in as far as its economic endeavors are concerned. And this weakness is giving chance to China to get into the region as we see the activities of China in Pakistan. Now, what do you think will make India able to counter China as long as these poor relations still exist between India and Pakistan, and as long as this CPAC is still weak? Thank you.
If I may start with the last question first. We have no illusions about the nature of strategic linkages between China and Pakistan. We don't expect those linkages to be eroded. In fact, what has happened in recent years suggests that there is in fact intensification or reinforcement of those linkages. I referred to China-Pakistan Economic Corridor being the flagship project of both land and maritime dimensions of Belt and Road Initiative, and also it's the most advanced component. Pakistan has leveraged its strategic geography to find new use for China in terms of its regional and global ambitions. So that will continue, and that will continue to complicate our relations with China, our wider security interests, as also be a factor in our engagement with Pakistan. So there is no doubt about it, and that's something we expect to continue. Indeed, become even more serious in years to come. Now, coming to this question about Belt and Road, whether it will help in development of the region, and whether we should also utilize BRI for development of our Northeast, for instance. Connectivity or economic development is perfectly in order. No one finds fault with that. What we have problem with is, one, nature of Belt and Road initiative, as I sought to explain in my presentation. Two, its implications in terms of our national security environment. And three, certain modalities of Belt and Road initiative. I'll just give you, since we're talking about development, I'll give you example of Sri Lanka, because I happen to be a commissioner in Colombo. You have seen the main projects that China has undertaken in Sri Lanka. Colombo South Terminal, which means this terminal being given to China, operational control coming under Chinese control for 35 years under a DOT arrangement. Hambantota, a port which is so unviable that last year it received something like 15 ships in the entire year, not counting car carriers which are forced to go there. Sri Lankan government was in no position to service even interest on loans taken from China, which amount to nearly $8 billion. It has been forced to hand over Hambantota port on a 99-year lease because of this predicament. This is hardly a good advertisement for Chinese assistance in development of our neighborhood. Terrorism. Now, if CPAC helps in economic development of Pakistan, there is no problem with that. But there are aspects of CPAC, as I explained earlier, which have direct implications for us. And it's not just limited to the fact that it passes through Pakistan occupied Kashmir, but Gwadar port. Potentially, we have every reason to suspect that it will become a naval facility for China not too distant the future. Or upgraded Karakoram highway. In fact, there was a question where it was rightly noted that Karakoram highway can never become a commercially viable conduit for movement of oil supplies from Gwadar port to China. In fact, cost is prohibitive. Karakoram highway is all about military implications, about strategic implications. It's not meant to be a commercial conduit. Question was raised about, Djibouti. Djibouti, as you know, is the first overseas facility acquired by China after protesting for years that it never acquired an overseas base. To my mind, Djibouti is just the first of many such facilities that China will acquire that is consistent with its ambitions in the Indian Ocean region, kind of network of places and bases it will require to maintain its presence in the IOR. Gwadar, as I mentioned, is a fit candidate for another Chinese facility in the region. Colombo or Hambantota are in a different category. Even though China has operational control on these two ports, nature of our relations with Sri Lanka is very different. So it will really require a breakdown in India-Sri Lanka relations before these ports are handed over to China as their facility.
I think the last two questions.
No, we have a slight time constraint, so this is something very reluctantly I may not recognize all the.
Can I just one question I missed out on AIIB? Please don't forget that India is the second largest stakeholder in AIIB, second only to China, next only to China. An Indian gentleman, Mr. Pandyan, is Vice President, Chief Investment Officer of AIIB. We are full partners in AIIB. There is no reason why we should not be accessing funds from this bank, which belongs to us as well.
Seema Siroi, I'm just visiting. I write for the Economic Times.
By the way, Seema Siroi is being very modest. She's a celebrated correspondent from Washington, D.C. for many years. So I can meet her later, especially your younger colleagues. Seema, all yours.
So Ashok, I was struck by the fact that you didn't use the word quad in your speech. And given the Maldives crisis recently, I would have thought it's a great opportunity for the four countries to at least issue a joint statement or do something. We don't have time to deliberate for years and years and develop the quad and whatnot. I thought it was a golden opportunity to signal to China and make it operational quickly. So I'd like your.
Seema, you wanted to ask? Go ahead.
I wanted to ask a more mundane question. This is about Vijay Gokhale's weekend visit to China. How do you see it? Will this year, 2017 was a bad year for India and China. There was a lot of tension, Doklam, everything happened. But this year, will it be better as they're going to try to chart out a calendar?
Thank you.
Just asking.
Ma'am, you want to go?
I am from Symbiosis. My name is Sharon. And the question was on Chinese, the image it wants to portray into the world. So you talked about China wants to have an equal standing with US and wants to assume a leadership role. We talk about Deng Xiaoping that talked about having a backward and improving your capacities while having a very backward role. And then you have Xi Jinping that wants to dominate the world. You have US that was a leader before, but they pursued a lot of liberal policies. Even though they went into strategic interests, they always hid it under humanitarian intervention, humanitarian needs. And now you have China that has a much more realistic policy and a realistic statements, and we want our strategy and our objectives is our primary importance. And even with BRI, a very interesting thing a term that you spoke of was opaqueness. So even with the Confucius Institute that it has, you have a lot of ambiguity and opaqueness. Why would China pursue such opaque policies if it wants to overthrow US and become a leader in the world? When you have moral and ethics, and that's what people would want from a leader.
My name is Kamaljeet. The Dawn has reported that 90%, the Minister of Benenzo, the Ports Minister, Benanzo told Senate that 91% of the income of Gwadar will go to Chinese. This has been reported by Don, saying in Senate. Benanzo, the minister, who is the port minister. Second thing, my question is something else, totally different. I'm talking about whatever happened yesterday. The major announcement was in China that Mr. Xi Jinping will be the president for life, along with vice president and general secretary and all that. How do you look at it? Will he become a dictator? Will he become a king or whatever? And what will be the implication on India and Belt and Road Initiative and everything else and the world? I mean, you can give us more than anybody else. Thanks.
Seema Suri, welcome. On Quad, I did make a fleeting reference to Quad in my presentation, in my remarks. Frankly, I feel it's an idea which needs to be fleshed out. I happen to be associated with the first edition of Quad, so I saw both birth and premature demise of Quad at that time. It has now been articulated once again. What are the objectives? What kind of roadmap we'll see for this initiative is still far from clear. As you have yourself pointed out, these four countries didn't think it necessary to come out with a communist joint statement on the Maldives, even though at least three of them have commented separately on the developments in Maldives. So Quad, I think, will require let's have a period of wait and watch and see whether excitement in certain quarters about Quad is really warranted. On Seema Guha's question on Doklam and what do we anticipate this year? Frankly,
And a visit. And a visit.
And the visit, yes. So visit is there. I mean, that's we understand from media reports that one primary objective of foreign secretaries' weekend visit to China was to prepare for Prime Minister's visit to that country in June this year for a multilateral summit. At the same time, I will not be surprised if we have more incidents along India-China border, because China, as I mentioned in my remarks earlier, is pursuing its contested territorial claims with degree of determination and in a unilateral manner, which is quite remarkable. And what's happening in South China Sea or what has happened in Doklam, just Exhibit A and Exhibit B to illustrate the Chinese mindset, and that mindset may get reflected in other incidents along the border. I won't be surprised at all. The point about bulk of income of Gwadar going back to China, in fact, reinforces the point I was making earlier about somewhat unequal nature of Sino-Pak engagement on projects linked to CPEC. Your question about what was announced yesterday, the Shenhua announcement of yesterday, that the Central Committee of the Communist Party of China recommended that two-term limit for state presidency and vice presidency be removed from the state constitution when National People's Congress deliberates on this issue in March this year. And one Central Committee has recommended clearly that's going to happen. That doesn't necessarily make Xi Jinping president for life. What is abundantly clear that Xi Jinping will stay beyond the 2 terms, which will come to an end roughly after 5 years. as president, 5 years from March this year, as General Secretary Party, 5 years from October last year. He will continue. That was something anticipated. Looking at various developments, first his designation as co-leader, then Xi Jinping thought being enshrined in the party constitution, then nature of Politburo Standing Committee which came out. It was fairly clear that President Xi is not going to leave come 2022. And this latest development just confirms that. But that doesn't mean that he will remain president for life. No.
Implication for India and the world.
Well, yeah, implications for India. The fact that you have a supreme leader in China who has very clear ambitions in terms of the Chinese dreams, in terms of China's pursuit of regional global leadership role, which I described earlier, and this leader is going to be around for foreseeable future, has obvious implications for us.
Thank you.
Sorry, changes because of the kind of interest this discussion has elicited. But Ambassador Kantha has another commitment, and I know some of you also want to know what I will go to say. Before I thank him and thank all of you, I think we did demonstrate that it's possible to have a 1 hour interaction without cell phones and without having make diversions. So I want to thank the audience at the outset for maintaining discipline as far as the discussion is concerned. One point I think about the BRI which Ambassador Kantha had made, and I think it could be a takeaway, which is that inasmuch as it is associated with President Xi Jinping and it would receive that kind of directivity in Beijing, when it was mooted, it was still a work in progress. Almost 4 years down the road, it has certain spokes and certain sectors where, as in the case of Pakistan, the CPEC, there's some kind of financial commitment that's being spoken about. But at the end of the day, it has to meet that very, very fundamental test that China's initiative of this scale and this scope, does it meet this tripod of being harmonious, with the kind of sectors it is trying to touch and catalyze? Is it sustainable? Because after all, for China to make a commitment of $1 trillion over an extended period is something that Chinese economists themselves and their financial wizards will need to introspect over the next few years. And finally, is it equitable? And that is where I think China is repeatedly not able to, and again I think Ambassador Kantha made this point, that whether it is in the case of Hambantota or the domestic debate in Pakistan over the last few months, that the extent that one has been able to monitor it, many ontological questions are being asked in Pakistan about the nature of the relationship and how it would. Somebody raised the question of sovereignty. That if the BRI and the CPEC are taken to their logical conclusion as envisioned by Beijing, that it would be a far from equitable arrangement for Pakistan and they would end up in a kind of debt trap. And by the way, this is not what we are saying, but discussions within Pakistan's more discerning kind of professionals. So I think these are issues that would need to be questioned, addressed, identified and deliberated, and that's where I would urge this audience, particularly those of you who are China watchers and those who are looking at the region, please visit the website of the Habitat or the Society for Policy Studies over the next few days. We hope to have the text of Ambassador Kantha's lecture up there, and there's also a video that will soon be available on YouTube. But if you study this more carefully, and I'm addressing this particular suggestion to the younger scholars here, that feel free to write your small essays or comments which are very focused, between 700 to 1,000 words. And if you send it to us, Lakshmi is here, she's one of our researchers at the SPS, and we have a couple of others who are helping us. We'd be happy to have a discussion thread going if there is enough content in it. So this is just the extended takeaway from today's lecture that Ambassador Kantha has so lucidly outlined. So let me thank you on behalf of the Habitat and the SPS. Thank you all, thank you Mr. Bhaskar for the Habitat for, as always, enabling this kind of research. Thank you.